Hello, welcome to Quiz Time. I'm Jess and today you join me for a 1960s quiz. So, they say if you remember the 60s, you weren't there. Shall we find out? Which US president signed the Civil Rights Act law in 1964? John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson or Richard Nixon? Lyndon B. Johnson. What famous music festival took place in 1969 and featured performances by Jimi Hendrix and The Who? Woodstock, Monterey Pop Festival or the Isle of Wight Festival? Woodstock. Which crisis brought the US and the Soviet Union to the brink of nuclear war over the placement of ballistic missiles in Cuba? Bay of Pigs invasion, Cuban Missile Crisis or Berlin Crisis? Cuban Missile Crisis. Who became the first woman to fly solo non-stop across the Atlantic Ocean in 1963? Bessie Coleman, Amelia Earhart or Valentina Tereshkova? Bessie Coleman. What 1965 Act established Medicare and Medicaid to promote healthcare for the elderly and low-income Americans? Social Security Act, Affordable Care Act or Social Welfare Act? Social Security Act. Which civil rights leader delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in '63? Martin Luther King Jr. What 1967 event in San Francisco is considered the start of the Summer of Love? Monterey Pop Festival, Woodstock or Summer of Love Gathering? Summer of Love Gathering. In 1968, the Tet Offensive marked a turning point in which conflict? Korean War, Vietnam War or Gulf War? The Vietnam War. Which British rock band released their hits like Good Times, Bad Times and Dazed and Confused? The Rolling Stones, The Who or Led Zeppelin? Led Zeppelin. Who was the first human to journey into space in 1961? Orbiting the Earth aboard the spacecraft Vostok 1, Yuri Gagarin, Alan Shepard or John Glenn? Yuri Gagarin. What major civil rights march took place from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama? Selma March, Montgomery March or March for Equality? Selma March. What iconic American singer-songwriter released the album Blowin' in the Wind in 1962? Bob Dylan, Johnny Cash or Joan Baez? Bob Dylan. Which American astronaut became the first person to walk on the moon in 1969 during the Apollo 2 mission? Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin or Mike Collins? Mike Collins. Who was the Soviet premier during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962? Nikita Khrushchev, Joseph Stalin or Leonid Brezhnev? Nikita Khrushchev. What influential science fiction television series was created by Gene Roddenberry? Doctor Who, Star Trek or The Twilight Zone? Star Trek. What 1964 Beatles song became an anthem for the civil rights movement in the United States? A Hard Day's Night, Let It Be, or A Change Is Gonna Come? A Change Is Gonna Come. What 1963 event oversaw 250,000 people gather in Washington, D.C. for a peaceful civil rights rally? March on Washington, Selma March, or Birmingham Campaign? March on Washington. Which musical group released the groundbreaking album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in 1967? The Rolling Stones, the Beach Boys, or the Beatles? The Beatles. Who was the first woman to orbit the Earth, achieving the feat in 1963 as part of the Soviet space program? Sally Ride, Valentina Tereshkova, or Yuri Gagarin? Valentina Tereshkova. What major rock music event took place in 1969 on a dairy farm in upstate New York and became a symbol of peace and love movement? Altamont Speedway Free Festival, Woodstock, or Monterey Pop Festival? Woodstock. Which country gained independence from British rule with Jawaharlal Nehru as its first Prime Minister? Kenya, India, or Nigeria? Kenya. Which political figure led to the Cuban Revolution? Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, or Raul Castro? Fidel Castro. What 1968 international treaty aimed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology? START 1, Non-Proliferation Treaty, or SALT 1? Non-Proliferation Treaty. Who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1962 for his influential work on novels like 100 Years of Solitude? Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Pablo Neruda, or Mario Vargas Llosa? Gabriel Garcia Marquez. What US presidential debate marked the first time candidates squared off on television? Kennedy-Nixon debate, Eisenhower-Kennedy debate, or Johnson-Goldwater debate? Kennedy-Nixon debate. What 1962 crisis between India and China over disputed border territories led to a brief military conflict? Suez Crisis, Cuban Missile Crisis, or Sino-Indian War? Sino-Indian War. Which groundbreaking science fiction novel by Anthony Burgess was published in 1962? Brave New World, A Clockwork Orange, or Dune? A Clockwork Orange. What 1964 Supreme Court case declared that individuals accused of a crime have the right to legal representation? Brown v. Board of Education, Gideon v. Wainwright, or Miranda v. Arizona? Miranda v. Arizona. Which American civil rights activist wrote the autobiography My Life with Martin Luther King in 1969? Rosa Parks, Coretta Scott King, or Fannie Lou Hamer? Coretta Scott King. In 1965, which American spacecraft made history by performing the first successful flyby of the planet Mars? Pioneer 10, Mariner 4, or Viking 1? Mariner 4. Which landmark speech did President John F. Kennedy deliver in West Berlin in 1963? Ich bin ein Berliner, Tear Down This Wall, or I Have a Dream? Ich bin ein Berliner. Which groundbreaking American television series became known for its humorous and socially conscious content? The Twilight Zone, The Mary Tyler Moore Show, or Sesame Street? Sesame Street. What historic event marked the construction of the Berlin Wall, separating East and West Berlin during the Cold War? Potsdam Agreement, Yalta Conference, or Checkpoint Charlie Crisis? Checkpoint Charlie Crisis. Who was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1964 for her discovery of the structure of the DNA molecule? Rosalind Franklin, Dorothy Crowfoot Hodgkin, or Marie Curie? Dorothy Crowfoot Hodgkin. Which influential American artist produced iconic works like Campbell's Soup Cans in the 1960s? Jackson Pollock, Roy Lichtenstein, or Andy Warhol? Andy Warhol. In which 1968 political protest was turned into a violent clash between demonstrators and the police? Woodstock Festival, Chicago 7 trial, or May Day protests? Chicago 7 trial. What 1966 science fiction novel by Robert A. Heinlein explores themes of individualism, self-reliance, and the exploration of Mars? Dune, Stranger in a Strange Land, or The Left Hand of Darkness? Stranger in a Strange Land. In 1962, which American astronaut became the first to orbit the Earth 3 times, making him a national hero? John Glenn, Alan Shepard, or Gus Grissom? John Glenn. Which British rock band released the album The Piper at the Gates of Dawn in 1967? The Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, or The Who? Pink Floyd. Which African country gained independence from French colonial rule in 1960, with Patrice Lumumba becoming the first Prime Minister? Ghana, Nigeria, or Democratic Republic of Congo? Democratic Republic of Congo. What significant 1968 movement was aimed at promoting peace and love and protested against the Vietnam War? Hippie movement, anti-war movement, or flower power movement? Flower power movement. What influential documentary film explores the lives of the Beatles during their visit to Hamburg in Germany? A Hard Day's Night, Help, or The Beatles, The Hamburg Years? The Beatles, The Hamburg Years. Which landmark US legislation signed into law in 1965 aimed at eliminating racial discrimination in voting, particularly targeting southern states? Civil Rights Act of '64, Voting Rights Act, or Equal Pay Act? Voting Rights Act. What 1967 novel by Kurt Vonnegut satirises the experience of a soldier during World War II and explores the concept of time travel? Slaughterhouse-5, Catch-22, or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? Slaughterhouse-5. Which African-American athlete won 4 gold medals at the 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome? Jackie Robinson, Jesse Owens, or Wilma Rudolph? Wilma Rudolph. What event involved the first successful message transmission between two computers at different locations? ARPANET launch, Internet Inception Day, or Moon landing? ARPANET launch. Who was the lead guitarist of the Jimi Hendrix Experience? Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, or Jimmy Page? Jimmy Page. Which American boxer changed his name to Muhammad Ali? Joe Frazier, Sonny Liston, or Cassius Clay? Cassius Clay. What international agreement was signed to promote economic cooperation among Western European countries? Treaty of Paris, Treaty of Rome, or Maastricht Treaty? Treaty of Rome. Which British rock band released the concept album The Who Sell Out in 1967? The Rolling Stones, The Who, or The Beatles? The Who. Halfway there, how are you doing? What book by Rachel Carson is credited with sparking the environmental movement by raising awareness about the dangers of pesticides? Silent Spring, The Population Bomb, or Unsafe at Any Speed? Silent Spring. Who was the first woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize, receiving the honour in 1966 for her work in promoting nuclear disarmament? Eleanor Roosevelt, Mother Teresa, or Linus Pauling? Linus Pauling. What 1966 science fiction novel by Philip K. Dick explores the nature of reality and identity? Do androids dream of electric sheep? The Man and the High Castle, or The Scanner Darkly? Do androids dream of electric sheep? I wonder if they do. Which French fashion designer, known for his avant-garde and futuristic designs, introduced the miniskirt in the mid-1960s? Yves Saint Laurent, Coco Chanel, or André Courrèges? André Courrèges. Which iconic American author was known for his works like On the Road? Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, or William S. Burroughs? Jack Kerouac. What 1968 US Supreme Court case affirmed the legality of interracial marriage, declaring anti-segregation laws unconstitutional? Loving v. Virginia, Brown v. Board of Education, or Roe v. Wade? Loving v. Virginia. Which American singer-songwriter was known for hits like Blowin' in the Wind and The Times They Are A-Changing? Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, or Pete Seeger? Amazing Songs by Bob Dylan. What event marked the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis as the United States and the Soviet Union came close to nuclear war over the missiles in Cuba? Bay of Pigs invasion, Cuban blockade, or 13 Days Crisis? 13 Days Crisis. What American astronaut spent more than 12 minutes outside the spacecraft? John Glenn, Neil Armstrong, or Ed White? Ed White. What 1961 event saw the construction of the Berlin Wall, dividing East and West Berlin during the Cold War? Potsdam Conference, Checkpoint Charlie Crisis, or Berlin Wall Crisis? Berlin Wall crisis. Which iconic British spy film series starring Sean Connery began in 1962 with the release of Dr. No, The Bourne Identity, Mission Impossible, or James Bond? James Bond. What 1967 US Supreme Court case established the principle of one person, one vote? Brown v. Board of Education, Baker v. Carr, or Miranda v. Arizona? Baker v. Carr. What global movement aimed to challenge traditional institutions and advocate for social change? Cultural Revolution, Prague Spring, or May 1968 protests? May 1968 protests. Which American actress and singer starred in films like Breakfast at Tiffany's and My Fair Lady? Audrey Hepburn, Marilyn Monroe, or Elizabeth Taylor? Audrey Hepburn. What landmark legislation in the United States aimed to combat poverty and improve the economic opportunity for all citizens? Social Security Act, Economic Opportunity Act, or War on Poverty Act? Economic Opportunity Act. Which American civil rights leader coined the phrase Black Power in 1966? Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, or John Lewis? Stokely Carmichael. What international sports event took place in Tokyo, Japan, and marked the first time the Olympic Games were held in Asia? 1964 Winter Olympics, 1964 Summer Olympics, or 1964 Commonwealth Games? 1964 Summer Olympics. Which American civil rights activist led the Selma to Montgomery marches in 1965? Fannie Lou Hamer, John Lewis, or Ella Baker? John Lewis. Which 1966 album by the Beach Boys is considered one of the greatest and most influential albums in the history of popular music? Pet Sounds, Rubber Soul, or Revolver? Pet Sounds. In 1969, which country became the first to land a spacecraft on the Moon with the Apollo 2 mission? United States, Soviet Union, or China? United States. What landmark 1963 US Supreme Court case ruled that state-sanctioned prayer in public schools was unconstitutional, violating the First Amendment? Brown v. Board of Education, Engel v. Vitale, or Gideon v. Wainwright? Engel v. Vitale. Who was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, awarded in 1966 for her discoveries related to nerve impulses? Rosalind Franklin, Marie Curie, or Gertie Cori? Gertie Cori. Which spacecraft became the first human-made object to leave the solar system carrying a message for potential extraterrestrial life? Voyager 1, Pioneer 10, or Apollo 2? Pioneer 10. Which American actress earned the nickname the Queen of Suspense in the 1960s? Betty Davis, Marilyn Monroe, or Janet Leigh? Janet Leigh. Which American singer, known as the Queen of Soul, released her breakthrough hit Respect in 1967? Diana Ross, Etta James, or Aretha Franklin? Aretha Franklin. What 1964 US legislation provided health services to low-income individuals and established Medicare and Medicaid programs, Social Security Act, Medicare Act, or Affordable Care Act? Medicare Act. What 1965 event marked the beginning of the Second Vatican Council? Vatican II, Council of Trent, or Lateran Council? Vatican II. Which 1968 science fiction film explores the relationship between humans and artificial intelligence and features the HAL 9000 computer? Blade Runner, 2001: A Space Odyssey, or Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Close Encounters of the Third Kind. What 1961 incident involving the capture of US intelligence gathering equipment by the Soviet Union heightened Cold War tensions? U-2 incident, Cuban Missile Crisis, or Berlin Wall crisis? U-2 incident. Which American astronaut, as part of the Gemini 12 mission in 1966, performed a record 5 spacewalks? Buzz Aldrin, Mike Collins, or Ed White? Buzz Aldrin. What 1968 event, often considered a turning point in the Vietnam War, saw the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong launch a surprise attack during the Lunar New Year? Battle of Khe Sanh, Tet Offensive, or Operation Rolling Thunder? Tet Offensive. Which American author was known for his controversial novel Lolita? Kurt Vonnegut, J.D. Salinger, or Vladimir Nabokov? Vladimir Nabokov. What 1966 American science fiction film, directed by John Frankenheimer, centers around a dystopian society where a televised event serves as a method of control? The Time Machine, Logan's Run, or Seconds? Seconds. Which African-American activist wrote the autobiography Soul on Ice in 1968? Angela Davis, Stokely Carmichael, or Eldridge Cleaver? Eldridge Cleaver. In 1963, what groundbreaking animated television series created by Hanna-Barbera featured a futuristic family living in the year 2062? The Jetsons, The Flintstones, or Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? The Jetsons. Which British spy film released in 1969 marked the 6th instalment in the James Bond series and starred George Lazenby as James Bond? Goldfinger, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, or Dr. No? On Her Majesty's Secret Service. What 1965 song released by the Rolling Stones became an international hit and is considered one of the greatest rock songs of all time? Paint It Black, Like a Rolling Stone, or Satisfaction? Satisfaction. Which American singer known as the Godfather of Soul released the hit song Papa's Got a Brand New Bag in 1965? Ray Charles, James Brown, or Otis Redding? James Brown. In 1968, who won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for his discovery of the genetic code and its function in protein synthesis? James D. Watson, Francis Crick, or Marshall W. Nirenberg? Marshall W. Nirenberg. What 1964 US legislation aimed to combat poverty and introduce programs like Head Start and Vista? Civil Rights Act, Economic Opportunity Act, or Voting Rights Act? Economic Opportunity Act. Which British model and actress known for her role in film Blow Up became an iconic figure in the swinging London scene in the 1960s? Twiggy, Jean Shrimpton or Patty Boyd? Jean Shrimpton. Which American astronaut became the first person to travel into space, completing a single orbit around the Earth in a spacecraft Freedom 7? Alan Shepard, John Glenn or Yuri Gagarin? Alan Shepard. What 1968 American animated film based on a novel by George Orwell tells the story of a society of animals overthrowing their human farmer? The Jungle Book, Watership Down or Animal Farm? Animal Farm. What 1966 album by the Beatles features the songs Eleanor Rigby and Yellow Submarine? The White Album, Rubber Soul or Revolver? Revolver. Which 1968 film, directed by Stanley Kubrick, explores the dehumanizing effect of war and features the character Private Joker? Apocalypse Now, Full Metal Jacket or Platoon? Full Metal Jacket. What 1964 event marked the first successful landing of an unmanned spacecraft on the Moon conducted by Soviet Union's lunar program? Apollo 2, Luna 1 or Luna 9? Luna 9. Which American politician who served as Vice President under President Lyndon B. Johnson won the 1968 presidential election? Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey or Gerald Ford? Richard Nixon. Which American boxer, known for his fierce rivalry with Muhammad Ali, won the World Heavyweight Championship in 1964? Joe Frazier, Sonny Liston or George Foreman? Sonny Liston. What 1966 American science fiction film directed by John Frankenheimer portrays a dystopian future where a computer network governs society? Logan's Run, The Andromeda Strain or Seconds? Logan's Run. And your last one. What 1969 American film directed by John Schlesinger tells the story of a young man's journey to New York City and his encounters with various characters? Midnight Cowboy, The Graduate or Easy Rider? Midnight Cowboy. So, how did you do on the 1960s? Drop your score in the comments below and of course like and subscribe so you get notified every time we post a new quiz. And please join us next time on Quiz Time.